Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Cross Wires. It's James here, and this week we've got a returning guest, and we're going to be talking about something really quite interesting. We've talked a lot about creativity on this show, and we've had Manny Faces on to talk about DJing. But this week, my returning guest, Ravi from A Retro Hour, is talking about making music with something that is a little bit older, or rather, something you might not expect to be used in music production these days. Ravi, welcome back to the show.
Hello, it's great to be here.
So, Ravi, just in case people didn't listen to your previous appearance, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
So I do interviews on a podcast called The Retro Hour with my colleagues Dan and Joe. We've been doing it for nearly a decade now, every single week, interviewing someone from the video game industry. And our idea is that we just wanted to tell these stories because there's so much going on in the video game world. A lot of stories kind of get missed, and we didn't really want to tell them. We wanted to hear from the horse's mouth. So we get the guests on and they tell us their story every single week. You know, it's really nice. And this has also led to us going to video game events and doing stuff like that. I've got a huge passion for the Amiga computers. So I've got like a small YouTube channel. I don't do much on there, but I do like DJing with the Amiga computers, which we're going to talk about. And I've kind of try and do as many different things as I can with Amiga because it's just one of those systems that I absolutely adored when I was growing up. And I'm glad that people are still kind of keeping it alive.
Absolutely. And so we should be honest, this is our second attempt at doing this episode. We had a few technical hitches on my last one. Don't quite know what happened, but we're back. And actually, it's worked out a little bit better because of an event Ravi's just come back from. But before we talk about that and talk about the DJing stuff, I believe you're trying to turn an Amiga 600 into a laptop right now.
This is like a crazy project that I did. Initially, it was called a scrap top. So the idea was that we'd make a laptop out of scrap or recycled materials. It would be a Commodore Amiga laptop using original hardware. So I've always kind of wanted an Amiga laptop. And, you know, they've always been in a nice little cute small form factor. And I thought, why couldn't this be done? But I didn't really have the technical knowledge. So I spoke to Dubious Engineering, who's a channel on YouTube, and he does a lot of dubious things. And he's always creating projects. And one thing I noticed, he was doing lithium batteries on like Raspberry Pi. So he's making little Raspberry Pi laptops with that. And he's a really nice guy, Howard. So managed to meet up with him. And we started creating this project together where he worked out the power, which is massively complex, and I don't have much understanding of it, but I have kind of learned a lot more about it now through this, and also doing stuff with solar panels in my shed and stuff like that.
What is it with retro YouTubers and solar panels? What's this obsession?
Oh, I just think it's electronics, you know, playing around with something, and I've always loved renewable energy as well. So that's good that you can actually have it. And I think I'm running like a little radio off there, and I could charge all my drill batteries and stuff, which is quite good fun, all for free. So
I like it. I love it.
Yeah, but the laptop basically it's morphed into a monster that's been built out of Lego. So I'm not very good at CAD and stuff like that, so I decided what easier thing to use than Lego. I could have used something else, but I think actually Lego's quite expensive and it's cost quite a bit to actually get this laptop created.
I do love the Lego construction mode. It speaks to two of my childhood fond, sort of memories, Lego and the Amiga. Because Commodore never made an Amiga laptop. And were there, because I know they did that portable, was it the SX64 for the C64? From your knowledge, were there any ever prototype or similar plans for a laptop-based Amiga?
There was one called the Commodore LCD, which was like a, LCD display kind of PDA device that would have been a Commodore 64. Only a few of those were ever made. There was quite a cool kit called a Pause, which was like a commercial attempt at making a laptop as well. But back then, the batteries were quite heavy as well, and they wouldn't have as much capacity as the lithium ones nowadays. So that was a cool little project though, and they're quite rare if you can find any of those.
Awesome. And as Ravi said, lithium batteries can be incredibly dangerous. So I'm guessing a lot of this will be getting what I think we call it balancing and the charge controllers right to make sure that you aren't going to explode.
Yeah, that's a risk that can happen. I do actually remember another one, which was I used to go to a local Amiga shop back in the days, and a guy called Simon Archer came in, and he'd created an Amiga laptop, and that was a bit of inspiration again, and that was still powered though, but it was in a kind of laptop form factor. Yeah, Howard's made it safe basically with battery management units and stuff like that. We've had a few smoking batteries sometimes. Those days are kind of gone. Now we've added the battery management in there.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ravi. I'm looking forward to seeing that when it's all completed, and I'm sure you're going to be making quite a fuss of that on YouTube and at various events. So there we go. So let's talk about music and Amiga. Now, when you think of 80s and 90s computers, is it fair to say that most people, when they think of music production, don't think of the Amiga, but instead think of the Atari ST because of its MIDI capabilities?
Yeah, totally. Like the Atari ST also was kind of embraced by the music industry a lot more than the Amiga. The Amiga was always kind of seen as like a games machine, and at least in the UK. And I think the Atari had better software in regards of like being a kind of digital audio workstation. So a Cubase was a great piece of software. You know, if you were mastering and stuff, it'd be really nice to use on the Atari. They had a program on the Amiga called Bars and Pipes. I remember that Prince was a fan of at one point. That was if you were all going down that kind of MIDI based route. The route that I like to go down was the kind of a tracker route, which was totally different to the MIDI stuff, but you could also use MIDI instruments to trigger samples in the tracker. Yeah, I've always loved working in that way, and it's also because, you know, I've learned these other ways of making music through sequences and stuff, and I've never really got on with it. I've always just stuck to the tracker.
For those of our listeners who maybe don't understand the term tracker, because I have a vague idea from obviously seeing you DJ on a few streams, but what is a tracker? What are the components of that in terms of then putting out music? Because it's much more modular than, say, a WAV file or something like that. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. So it would work with certain music formats. So .mod was obviously one of the biggest ones, but then there were later ones like .xm and stuff, which were on the PC, and they'd enable more channels to be in the music tracker. And the tracker itself is kind of it was like a sequencer, but it worked in blocks. So you'd have blocks, and the notation would be put in the blocks, and you'd have separate channels. So on the Amiga, it was like 4 channels, and there were some famous pieces of software like Pro Tracker, Noise Tracker, I think was one of the first ones. There was all different types of things that you could do with trackers as well. So not only could you put in notes and instruments, you could put samples in there as well. And you could also do stuff like, there's crazy commands that have been found nowadays. Like there's a reverse command. So you can actually send the tracker backwards and do like scratching effects on it and stuff. There's also another one where people have now started doing tracker art. So if you look at the tracker, it looks a lot like the Matrix with kind of falling letters and stuff. People have now built animations inside some of the songs. So when you're kind of playing them, there'll be like a demo or a kind of video going on inside the tracker. It's pretty amazing. And also, like, there were certain tricks and stuff because of the limitations of the chip with the Amiga. You know, 4 channels suited it, but there was another format called MED later on where it increased the number of channels, and it would do stuff like run at half the speed and stuff like that to basically get more sound out of the limitations of the audio chip. But once that was removed, trackers kind of became a thing to, just be a bit nostalgic about and like look back. Like there's a great one called Open MTP, I think it is at the moment, that's available for Windows, and you can compose in that and then send it out to the Amiga or, have the ability to convert your samples and stuff.
Amazing. And for yourself, Ravi, what got you into, sort of making music? Because when I've seen you you've got a wonderful little setup. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're using two A600s with little monitors and audio outputs into just like a standard DJ mixer.
Yeah, so initially when I grew up, I was in an area that was very kind of wild. So I lived in quite a poor area in the city, and we'd have a local park, and that park, basically, they would hold raves on there every night and, every weekend, and the council wouldn't be able to do anything. So they'd just get a sound system, drive a truck onto the park and just start a big party. And if the police came, then there'd be a big riot. So they'd just leave them to it. And when I was a kid, I'd basically have this kind of, influence of rave and dance music. There was a lot of pirate radios around as well. We'd spend most of the time listening to pirate radio or trying to get on the pirate radio. So that whole DJ culture, like stemming from like Jamaican sound systems into rave and drum and bass and stuff, was kind of like built into me as a kid. There'd also be a lot of warehouse parties in the areas that I was at, free parties, they call them. And that would just be on an industrial estate, a huge party with like 300 people in a warehouse that would just pop up randomly. And they were often better to go to than the ones in the city centre. So, yeah, that was really good when I was kind of growing up at that time period. And that really got me into the music. But also, I was sitting at home listening to Amiga music as well. And some of the Amiga music was very kind of ravey, dance-based. But some of it also was very fantasy-based. And there was some amazing Amiga musicians like Tim Wright, Alistair Brimble, Bjorn Lynn as well, Dr. Awesome. There was guys like Slayer as well. A lot of the demo scene musicians used to really be into. And of course, getting those crack tros on those discs.
Oh, yes.
When you put them in, yeah, and heard that crack music, that would like identify the piracy group and kind of, it would give them an image, like Razor 1911 was one. Melon Designs as well. Lemon Designs, even they called themselves Melon at some point. It was good fun. But Cortex and Paradox and stuff. But you'd always have that kind of different style of music, and it was usually stuff that wouldn't be on the radio, or it would just sound a little bit different or a little bit kind of stranger to me, and that really gripped me as a kid.
And you talk about the music in demos and in games, and I remember some of the music in even something as iconic as Lemmings, just that wonderful track in Lemmings. And because I know recently, I think before you went off to this event, you did a preview and you were using Lemmings samples, and it just made me smile. But games like Team 17's Project X,
oh yeah,
I just remember that had a great soundtrack.
Yeah, and they were really banging as well. Like some of the drums in there and stuff sounded great, and like a lot of them were actual soundtracks at the time. So a lot of producers were using Amigas, and I didn't know about this back then. I thought it was just a weird computer from America that my dad had upstairs. I didn't know that Super Sharp Shooter, which was I think is DJ Hype, or is one of the big DJs. He released that was in the charts at the time. There was stuff like Magic Pockets. The sound of that was Betty Boo in the charts as well. And there was quite a lot of stuff actually. Some Justice was another one. And you kind of recognize these sounds, but I didn't put it all together in my head until an amazing piece of software came out. It was created by DJ Hoffman and Akira, which is called PT1210. And that's enabled me to DJ with the Amiga 600s.
And that's a very clear homage to the Technics 1210 decks, but are they still, still to this day, probably the gold standard of DJ decks? Yeah,
so everybody literally, even back in those raves and stuff, they would be all after the Technics SL1210 Mark II, which was like the prime kind of DJ equipment, because there was a difference with DJ decks where you had a belt drive where it was ran by a belt, or direct drive. And direct drive was really, it was built in, it was mechanical rather than on a belt that could slip and cause like flutter. And the SL1210s were like the prime item. I remember, they were so strong, people would stand on them and stuff. And like you could take them to any event and they wouldn't get ruined. And that would be like your kit for life. It would be like having that car that never fails or something like that. So having that homage to the 1210 decks in the software name is really good. Yeah.
So walk us through a little bit of a setup from from both the hardware and the software side. I mean, let's start with the hardware, because, when you're setting up, you obviously don't have huge CRTs and sat up there. How do you rig everything up for a set?
So I've got the two Amiga 600s, and because the 600s were a bit cost-cutting by Commodore, the 1200s tend to sound a bit nicer. They have a noise gate, I think it's high-pass filter that's in there that you need to remove. And a little program called LED does that, which kind of takes it out and makes your Amiga sound better. So even if you're not DJing on that, I suggest looking on Aminet and downloading this program called LED and running that, and then seeing what the sound is like afterwards, because it does do a noticeable improvement. But on the 600s, you have to take some resistors off. So DJ Hoffman showed me this, and I'm not very good at soldering, but I put the soldering gun on and just ripped a few resistors off like a madman. And the difference in sound was just unbelievable. It just sounded so different and really cool. So I have these two Amigas, and then I have these video screens, and these screens just literally take the component composite output and display it, and they're used for like car entertainment units, but they're quite cheap on eBay, so you can use them, and you can convert them to just run off a 12-volt kind of plug adapter,
because that's what we're designed for.
Yeah, and then I've just ripped out the floppy drives from each of the Amigas, because you don't need them, because I'm running off a SD card in there, and also they're quite heavy, so if you're taking this stuff around, you want it to be as light as possible. I've also got a Y cable, which is an essential thing, because there's stereo separation, basically. With the Amiga, like drums would come out of the left speaker, and on the right speaker you get piano. But if you're DJing and you've got drums in the different ears and stuff, it's really confusing. So I kind of take the output out, and that also can sound really bad in a club as well, or it can sound wonderful. It's like, depending on, your kind of preference. But I use a plug that goes into the left output, and that does like a little kind of fake mixing and mixes the two signals together.
So are you just using the left output? Because I did notice only one audio cable. So are you just sending out of the left?
Yeah.
And then doing sort of a mix out. Okay.
And that's a little trick that I didn't know about. Like all of this stuff I didn't know about before the internet, like the resistors and using those little screens and stuff. But, somebody said to me, oh, if you just go out of the left output, and you're like, oh my God, wow, that actually works. And it's like,
it works, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that shared knowledge of people that have been DJing with Amigas and stuff. And it's created this kind of standard setup you can have now. So I was DJing with DJ Hoffman recently, and I just bought my decks, and it was exactly the same setup as his.
Nice.
So we could just go on each other's without even thinking. And it just felt comfortable, which is good.
That's good. And of course, this then, I guess, leads me from a hardware point of view to my next question, because if you're just using apart from the resistor mod, of course, but if you're just using the audio output and the composite output, you don't need to do any HDMI mods. Obviously taking out the floppy drive. You correct me if I'm wrong, you're not putting a Gotek back in its place. You're just leaving it empty, and using the SD card. I'm guessing SD to some form of IDE adapter?
That's exactly it, yeah, SD to IDE. You can use a few things that Hoffman's shown me, which is using a PMCIA. I always get this wrong. The card at the start.
PCMCIA.
Yeah, that's it. Where you could put a compact flash in there, and then you can load the tunes via compact flash, so you won't even need to open the Amiga. And that's really good because he just turned up with 2 compact flashes and then just put them in my Amigas, and straight away that worked.
That's an interesting point.
Another thing is 2 megabytes of chip RAM. That's all we have in it. And I was loading it. So I'm not very good with startup sequences. And I was loading it so Workbench loaded first, and then the program loaded. And the problem with that was Workbench took up a little bit of memory. So I have reduced memory on there, where Hoffman taught me a way to put it into the startup sequence so Workbench doesn't even load at all. It just goes straight into the tracker program, and then it's got that full 2 megabyte of memory to DJ with.
Got you. So just like back in the DOS days, we would have to spend hours setting up our config.sys and autoexec.bat to squeeze out that extra couple of K for was it conventional memory, when certain games needed, like, I think like Wing Commander 3 needed like 600K, and if you got your sequence right, you could squeeze it out while still having your CD-ROM drivers, still having your mouse driver. Exactly
that, yeah. And it's like by skipping loading the Workbench, you're just going in there and maximizing what you can get. And I didn't know about that, and that was really a kind of bonus. Yeah, and there's all kinds of like little tricks and stuff like that really help. And a lot of these have come from, the demo scene, and also from these people that would make crack music that had to fit on a disc that already had a full game on it, already had a full kind of, program on there.
That's the point, yeah.
A small amount of kilobytes to actually make a song,
Because what were the Amiga floppy drives? Were the 800Ks?
It's 880. Yeah, because it was double density rather than a high density.
Right. So for those who aren't familiar with floppy drives, in this particular generation, when we talk 3.5-inch floppies, double density would be 880, high density or HD, no, not high definition. Yeah. High density is what you would associate with a 1.44 meg floppy. I mean, I think there are more. There's like you can get 2-odd meg floppies, but the Amiga was 880, and think about that, folks.
Yeah,
880K. Like, hang on 1 second. Let me just look at something really quick. I want to just see. Yeah, so a screenshot of my Mac's desktop is about 600 and odd K. That's just one JPEG image, one PNG image, and people were fitting games.
It was such a nightmare as well, because that format of disc as well started to become less and less popular. So you'd actually have to go out and search for the double densities. And there was a program called CrossDOS as well, which meant that you could read MS-DOS floppy disks on your Amiga, but also you'd be like limited to the size that you could read as well. So you'd have to try and work out how to get like a 1.44 and cram it all into that area. So yeah, lots of compression and stuff like that, or splitting discs and all of that kind of nonsense.
Well, that's why Amiga games came on so many discs.
Yeah. 12 discs for Monkey Island was one, I think. Yeah, Monkey Island 2. Yeah.
And the worst part was when game devs hard-coded the disk drive ID, so that even if you bought a second floppy drive, it wouldn't matter because the game was always looking for DF0. It would never look at DF1.
Yeah, well, even to the point of ESCOM owning the Amiga. That was late in the 90s. They'd stopped making double-density drives, so ESCOM actually had to get loads of PC drives and add a wire in there and then hack them when they were selling them with the Amigas, and then they didn't work, and people had to release like an ESCOM fix to get them working. So yeah, it was a real kind of limitation, and you forget about it when you're not using floppies every day.
Which is why Gotex is such a good idea. I love authentic hardware, but let just put a Gotek in your system, folks. Yeah. Don't manage with floppy disks. Anyway, so software-wise, the PT1210, effectively, that is just like your deck. So what can, because you've got yours all mapped out with keyboard commands. How does it work actually DJing off this software?
So it works like it's following the standard principles of DJing. So it's kind of like, you have your 2 different beats per minute, and that's really important because older trackers would usually do tempo instead of beats per minute. So you're able to change the beats per minute and then match them. There's no synchronizing. So nowadays you'd have a button that you press and it will find the beat and then it will synchronize it automatically. Or even with Game Boys, if you're DJing with those, you can do sync cables and stuff. This won't work like that.
Sorry, what? DJing with Game Boys? Is that a whole other area that I've completely missed?
Yeah. So there's a Little Sound DJ is a program for that, but also there's a whole world of Game Boy DJs as well that you can go into. There's a lot of old video game systems that people are using, but yeah, that has its own kind of world of software. Same with the Atari ST as well, and I think there's some Mega Drive DJs out there and stuff. So.
Oh, that I would love. I would love to see a couple of old Mega Drive. Now, here's as one quick aside: if you were going to be a Mega Drive DJ, would you want to be there with the Mega Drive Mark 1, the original, or would you rather be out with Mark 2s?
I'd have a Mark 1, but I'd attach it like a guitar because of that, like, guitar-y Mega Drive kind of grungy sound.
I love it. So, sorry, Ravi, carry on, because this is honestly really fascinating. Thank you so much.
It's all right. So those Game Boy DJs tend to dominate the whole DJ scene as well. So if you check them out, the chiptune scene, there's a lot of really talented Game Boy DJs. Harley Likes Music is one of my favorite. But the 1210, it works in a unique way. Being a tracker, you've got 4 channels in there, so you can turn them on and off with some of the buttons, which is really useful. Being able to kind of, take the drums out of one and then bring them into the other and mix like that. It's also got looping functions. So with the way that mods work, they work in a block, and then a block, or otherwise known as a pattern, is sequenced. So you'll have the blocks, you'll have like maybe 10 blocks, and then a sequence will go to block 1, go to block 2, go to 1, like that, and it will kind of take you around there. So it has options to kind of loop certain sections of it as well. So you can loop it for like 32 notes, 16, 8 as well, and 4 or 2. So you can get the kind of doof doof or the kind of effects, and you can have it like looping in that way, and it will still stay in time with the other ones. But also it has different start positions. So a lot of these mods were made in bedrooms by people that kind of, weren't professional composers and stuff like that. So initially they had stuff like, they'd have a mad intro with loads of samples. But if you want to skip through that, you can skip across, choose a different position. I'll start when the drums start, and then set it to do that, and then go from there as the start rather than when the crazy sample comes in, which is the equivalent of like lifting the needle on a record and then dropping it in at the right kind of position.
But much more precise.
Yeah, and that's another thing, much more precise. So I mentioned that you can get Flutter and WoW and stuff like that on the vinyl records because, they're analog and they're moving like this. This is digital, so it sticks to the signal. So once you do get using it, it will stick in the pattern, it will repeat, and that is a lot easier for me. DJing, we used to have this thing where you'd have to have your finger pushed on it at a certain point if you had some not very good DJ decks, just to kind of keep it consistent. You'd be like pushing it along and kind of, applying a bit of even pressure throughout to get it going. And if it sounded slower, you'd increase the pressure on your finger. There was all little techniques like that. Yeah. And you can also do stuff like bumping up the BPM. So if it's out of sync, if it feels a bit slower, you can just really quickly hit high on the BPM and then go low again, and it will just move on a little bit. And that really helps when you're like mixing and stuff.
That's really cool. And now I'm getting the impression that one of the reasons you've got the blocks and the sequence. So say, for example, you've got a block which is a particular drum beat, for example, a particular sample of a drum or a vocal sample. Yeah. And you want to then reuse that in, say the chorus. I'm thinking, from a traditional song arrangement point of view, you've got a few samples using the chorus,
Yeah, so those would be channels. Those would be channels. So the block has 4 channels. So one of the channels would be the drum beat. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But let's say, for example, you're going to reuse that whole block in the chorus. That's in the sequence, but the block's only been stored once.
Yeah. So it could like be only used once, but you can say repeat that one, on a loop constantly, and then bring it in or out, or you can extend tunes in that kind of way.
That's what I'm thinking, which means you can fit more music runtime into a single mod file because you can repeat and reuse stuff. Whereas, a traditional, when I say traditional, a wave recording, be that a wave or be that an MP3, the whole song takes up the whole song. Does that make sense in terms of file storage?
Yeah. So like I've got some that are really long, some mods that have like 20 or 30 blocks in them, and they'll keep going. Or I've got some ones that have 4. But if I'm playing with the 4 one and I'm taking notes in and out and I'm fiddling about with it and stuff, I can make it sound like it's a lot bigger or a lot longer, which is quite a good advantage.
And that's where, as you said, the flexibility comes where you're able to manipulate, the channels, things that you can't do with, a traditional vinyl record. I know you can maybe EQ out some stuff to bring out, to lower frequencies, but you can't take out, individual samples or individual channels. I think I remember vividly one time helping out at a school assembly, and one of the French teachers came running in, and this guy won't be too nasty to him in case he's ever listening. I doubt he will be, but he was a very passionate man, and he wanted his year 7s to sing Jingle Bells in French. 5 minutes before the assembly is about to start, he brings in a cassette tape that had the song on it, and comes in and says, "Guys, need you to take the lyrics off of this." And we're like, pardon me? Like, we've got 5 minutes before. How exactly do you expect us to do that, sir? He's like, "Just do it," and stormed off out. And of course, what we're trying to do is take off the EQ on. So we said, okay, we're going to put this on a we actually got like one of, those old school cassette players that we used for oral tests.
Yeah.
We got one of those and plugged that into a separate channel so we didn't mess with the rest of the EQ for the other people's cassettes, because of course everyone brought stuff in on cassettes. And when we tried to EQ, like we took a bit of a mid out, bit of a high out to try and get with vocals, it didn't work, which was a good thing, because not one of those year 7s was singing. They started at the front of the stage. By the end of that song, I think we lost about 5 year 7s behind the curtain at the back of the stage because we kept backing up and backing up. None of them wanted to be there. But of course, if he'd got his Jingle Bells in French in a mod file,
it's like there was some like older examples of stuff like that. Like I remember I used to listen to the Beatles records, and I used to have, I've still got them, like the mono pressings.
Oh yes, yeah.
And on those, you'd have the vocals in the right speaker and then everything else in the left. Yeah. And there is a modern kind of version of that form. It's called stems, and that's one with lots of different instruments, but it's kind of like the equivalent of a music studio with like a 24 channel mixer or something, but before the mix downs happened. So you've got
in production. Yeah.
You've got all the elements, and that's how I kind of see mods. It's like before the mix down actually happened,
Oh, I like that point of view. Yeah, it is the raw performance on each separate channel, and then the output that comes into your DJ decks is the mix down. Is that?
Yeah, and they used to call it the bounce as well for some. I'm going to bounce.
I never understood that term because
never did I. Yeah.
I think even I can't remember. It was like Logic. I think still uses that term.
Yeah, Audio Logic. Yeah, I was trained on that for a bit because I worked in theatre and I did a lot of I was a sound engineer for my professional work as well, and like bounce was always one thing that I was saying. I would never get that kind of connection. Yeah, maybe there's a reason for it. There must be.
You know what? If anyone out there, works in that space, works in the sound engineering and production space, particularly those, the big doors like Logic and music production tools, and you know what bounce means, please send over an email to podcast@crosswires.net, and we will absolutely put it into the show notes description. Hang on a second. The show will be out. We'll do something with it. We'll make a fuss. We'll add it. We'll just make sure it's highlighted. And thank you. Yeah. Or you can comment on the episode. So there you go. Ravi, what do you find So, I mean, it works well. What have been some of your... I mean, we absolutely want to talk about Amiga 37 before we wrap up, but before Amiga 37, what have been some of your favourite experiences taking that kit out, doing DJs? I know, for example, you've done stuff with Neil at RMC Retro before.
Yeah, that was awesome, like doing a live DJ set. I do a lot of that as mainly practice, kind of just do it live and then chat to people and stuff, and I could play with some new tunes and stuff like that. But what I love to do is go out, and it's always really nerve-wracking, like going out kind of performing. A lot of people like it as a novelty kind of factor, like, oh, he's using old computers. But there's also certain places that really kind of embrace it. So one that I did was a Steel City chiptune, which was in Sheffield. And that had Game Boy artists. It was like a huge event. And I thought, they've invited me to come and do this. There's not going to be that many people there not interested. And I think it was about 100 in the audience. It was a really wicked night. I remember I was on 1200s then. I was just walking through Sheffield at like 3 a.m. with these two 1200s, just like, I need to get a lighter setup. And I think I still had the floppy drives in there. It was hell. I was dragging them through the city centre. I think there were goths everywhere and stuff. It was like, yeah.
You must have got some incredible looks from people.
I did, just like, what the hell, And especially when a lot of DJs turn up with just a USB stick nowadays, and you're dragging all this equipment around. Another one that I did was supported DJ Yoda, who's a huge hip-hop DJ. And that was a really cool gig. He did a hip-hop set. I did like a mad jungle one before, and I was so nervous before that one, really nervous. But then a recent one that I've started doing, like, I think the problem with the nerves was I wasn't as trusting as with the kit. Now I've worked the kit out more. It's a lot more kind of relaxing, and you can just get on with it. But when you first start, you're like, oh, what if this breaks? What if I'm in the middle of it soldering? But
hold on, folks, you should take a quick solder break here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, Guru Meditation pops up or something like that.
Oh, wow.
The good thing about performing is as well, you can get a video output and put it on screens as well, which is a weird thing as well, because when you usually watch a DJ, you don't usually see what they're doing.
No.
Where, like, if you've got a video output, so I just use the splitter cable on the composite out and then put that into a projector. When you do that, everyone can see what you're doing exactly, what the next tune is, and it adds a different kind of dynamic.
I like that.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like a different way of kind of doing it. And like people like at the chip events and stuff, they'll be like, he's doing that, he's doing that. Other people, they're just like, it's the Matrix. Like, it just looks crazy to them. But another one I did recently was amazing, actually. It was a horror film festival, independent horror film festival in the woods. So they were showing all these horror films. Oh, God, really, really scared of the horror films. As people were walking into the woods, as the light was going down, I was playing this kind of like horror soundtracks on the Amiga and stuff, and that worked really well. And that audience, they didn't know it at all. They weren't like aware of my stuff before. And then on the mic, they were like, "Who remembers the Amiga computer?" at the end and stuff, and everyone was like, "Yeah." So that went down really well, yeah. And I love doing it to people who don't know anything about it. Like, it's good to show Neil and stuff, but he'll be like, yes, the Amiga. He's probably got like 4.
Well, he knows his Amiga inside out. Like this guy opens Amigas for fun. It's like, I'll just open up another Amiga today. I'll put something random into it.
Yeah, exactly. But I like someone who comes from, like played with one maybe back in the days in their mate's living room, Sensible Soccer or something, and then sees it years later.
Yeah.
And like hears all those kind of dance music. But also with the modern equipment, it's compressed. So it comes out aiming for that kind of mid area, where with the Amigas, there's no compression. So it's just like, it's got that kind of old school sound where the like drums can be really like, and like the bass can just be horrific. And if you hear that on a big sound system, it does sound very different from, and like unclean, or like, it sounds kind of a bit rawer for me, which also I like producing that because people haven't heard that sound for years. Like, I remember when I used to go to all the old parties and listen to pirate radios and stuff, like nobody could mix properly. Everything would be EQ'd badly. but that was part of it. It was like that kind of, you just think, wow, that's a great tune. Or also there'd be loads of feedback on the mic constantly. All of these things. It was never in a set, clean kind of environment, which a lot of these like dance events or parties are done nowadays in like very clean environments with sound systems, and it's all digital and it's all kind of, and I kind of miss the days where it's all a bit like homemade and broken.
And of course, you've just recently been out to, now correct me if I'm wrong, Amiga 37, so it's basically like a big Amiga gathering, and this was in Germany, I believe.
Yeah, so this was in, let me try and say it, Mönchengladbach in Germany. And I'd previously been to Amiga 34, and then COVID struck, and obviously that it's only just started going ahead again. But that event is insane because the German users, they had like Commodore, and then they had ESCOM, which was like their local.
That's right.
Kind of company, and they took over Amiga. So I think, there's that kind of a bit longer lasting love for Amiga there, or a bit more of a seriousness about it. So at this event, there was over 1,000 people, which, like 20 or 30 years after the system kind of failed, still getting 1,000 people coming, traveling, meeting up for it from all over the world. It's pretty amazing. And what they did for it was they had a club night at the end. So had like Chris Hulsbeck, who did the Turrican soundtrack playing, John Hare, who did Cannon Fodder as well, Fast Loaders, who did like heavy metal versions of Turrican and stuff. And in the other room as well, they had us all night. I think we went till about 3 or 4 a.m. Me and DJ Hoffman, inventor of the software, connected to the sound system and playing on our Amiga 600s. And that was a hell of an experience. It was probably one of the best gigs I've ever done. And that was purely because the people there were amazing. The atmosphere was wicked. The club, everybody loved it there. The club's called Project 42, which is actually named after an Amiga demo called Project 42. I think at one point we were DJing, and everyone was dancing. You could kind of play what you wanted. So I played even some Gabba at one point, which was incredibly hard, kind of 205 beats per minute music. But I was playing jungle and stuff like that. But at one point, some people, German girls, came in and said, "What's Amiga?" And they didn't have a clue, but they were still all dancing on the dance floor and stuff. And I thought, yeah, that's really cool. If they don't even know what it is, but they're still able to party,
Amazing. And it just shows how, one of the things we love to explore is people doing things differently with technology, using, both old retro and modern tech. And there are some wonderful DJing apps now, as we talked about with Manny Faces. There's things like Serato Scratch, but even then going down to the more bedroom DJ or home DJ, things like DJay for I think is it Logarithms DJ app, and you can put that on your iPhone. It's incredible. And so if people want to look at trackers, you've mentioned a few pieces of Windows software. Now, one thing that we discussed in the last episode is obviously, yes, you can emulate Amiga hardware in something like a Raspberry Pi or a Pi 400, which of course Ebon Upton on your show even said that thing is a homage to the A600. But correct me if I'm wrong, from what we discussed when we first tried to do this episode, yeah, that's going to work from a software point of view, but you're not going to get the same experience because you're routing it through software audio. So it's not going to be the same sound at all. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it depends. So if you're making something on the PC, Amiga used samples as well as kind of stuff that the Paula chip would do. So, if you heard a lot of Cracktros, they would definitely be like Paula chip or kind of SID chip sounding stuff because they had limited room, so they'd have to kind of create the notes. But a lot of sampled ones, there were songs that were just pure samples, and they'd sound pretty much the same if you use like Open MPT, which I mentioned, and Renoise as well as another one, which is quite a popular tracker, Renoise. But the best thing about trackers is if you pick up one, they're all free. And, you just load a tune into there and like deconstruct it and play around, change some of the notes, and you'll start to learn the principles straight away. And I'm not amazingly good with them. I understand them, but I don't write stuff in them. I don't compose my own music. I just mix other people's amazing music. And I think they're just great things. Like, do you remember Unreal Tournament? Game, that all that music was made with trackers, even though it was quite late on as well. And you can actually, like, if you go back, you can kind of hear the kind of tracker demo-y kind of sound in there. And I think it's one thing that's going to keep going. And it's also like something that will get popular into major culture. Like there was that artist Timbaland who famously stole the song Acid Jazzed Evening off a C64 composer, and then did a Nelly Furtado remix of it. And like there's there's always going to be interest in that because it's a different kind of sound. And I think there's always going to be a niche for it as well and stuff. And one day I'd like to start composing my own music. I just need to like start learning piano again and getting back into it like that kind of way. But mixing it for me is just fun because some of those songs, even when you play them today, you just like get goosebumps because some of the composers were just so utterly awesome. And then you're always finding new stuff as well. So Exotica on Mod Archive is a great place to look for new tunes. I think it's the biggest video game FTP in the world. It's called Modland. It's got thousands and thousands and thousands of tunes, and all in different formats. So like, Game Boy formats and PlayStation, all this kind of stuff.
Love it. So Ravi, thank you so much for chatting us through this. If people want to find out, maybe see more of your sets or find out more about what you do, can they find, have you got stuff up online of some of the sets?
So I've got tons of DJ sets on my YouTube channel, actually. And they're mainly me kind of just practicing at home and playing around. But there's some pretty fun stuff in that. And I always try and do like a different genre or format of sound. I was doing that for a while, but now I'm just kind of like play tunes that I enjoy and just have a laugh and that kind of stuff. You can check that out on YouTube. So that's just Ravi Abbott, and you can also check out Retro Ravi on Twitter as well, where I'll be posting links as well.
Excellent. Ravi, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of Cross Wires. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So please drop us a note over to podcast@crosswires.net.
You can also drop us a comment on the post, or if you're a GoodPod user, why not start a discussion there too?
Make sure you follow us on Twitter @CrosswiresMG, and of course you can find the show in all the good podcast apps, and all the really bad ones too.
If you'd like to check out more of our content, head on over to crossedwires.net/YouTube for all our videos, and keep an eye on our Twitch channel at crossedwires.net/live for our upcoming streams.
If you like what you heard, please do drop a review in your podcast directory of choice. It really does help spread the word about the show.
And of course, if you can spare even the smallest amount of financial support, we'd be incredibly grateful. You can support us at ko-fi.com/crossedwires. That is ko-fi.com/crossedwires.
Until next time, thanks for listening.